Welcome to an episode of Behind the Scenes, a weekly program unveiling the biggest political developments in Somali politics and the wider Horn of Africa region. I'm Sultan Mohammed, your host and producer here on HORUFADHI Media. On this week's program, a reconciliation summit organized by the Speaker of the Lower House of the Federal Parliament of Somalia, Sheikh Adam Madobe, is set to kick off soon as President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud arrived in Baydhabo. Now, with increased tensions in recent months, including clashes in the transitional capital Baydhabo, can there be a peaceful solution to the current impasse in what seems to be a political deadlock? This is the topic on the program today. We hope you find this program very informative. Please like, share, and for similar content, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media. Also, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media Group's second channel, known as HORUFADHI TV, where you are currently watching this program and where you can find other exclusive programs, such as the African Weekly Roundup, Salah, among others. And last but not least, do follow myself, Sultan Mohammed, Salman Hashi, Yasin Abdi, and the wider HORUFADHI Media team on our social media platforms that should appear on the screen any moment. Let's get straight into it. As President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud arrives in the transitional capital of Southwest State, federal member states will be keeping a close eye on the upcoming Baydhabo conference, as State President Abdulaziz Laftagaren will be holding direct talks and discussions with a series of opposition candidates opposed to his government and the current election roadmap. Aside from Puntland, all federal member state presidents have had their terms extended and will be interested as to how this political impasse is resolved. Now, tensions in Southwest State have been brewing under the surface for over a year prior to the election of President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud in May of last year. A group of politicians that banded together in Mogadishu have been waging a political war against the Southwest State government, which turned violent last year after the formation of the so-called Southwest State Salvation Force Militia, or SWSF. The militia and the state security forces clashed in Baydhabo last month after the former allegedly set up checkpoints and were using the home of an opposition member as a weapons storage facility. It was in May 2022 when President Laftagaren summoned all MPs and senators representing Southwest State to discuss political events that were unfolding in Mogadishu, including plans to remove him from office by this coalition of Southwest State politicians. Now, speaking to the media at the time, MP and former commander of the Custodial Corps, Mahad Abdurrahman Aden, said, "We know there are meetings being held in Mogadishu and we will defend President Laftagaren." So before we assess what could come out of this conference, let's take a look at how this political impasse in Southwest State initially unfolded. Now, the dispute revolves around two major elements: the 2021 to 2022 elections that took place in Southwest State Somalia, in which some politicians claim to have been denied access to participate in the parliamentary elections. The most vocal of these dissidents is former Speaker Jawari. Number two is Southwest State regional presidential elections, which has been disputed by opposition political camps. President Laftagaren was elected president of the federal member state on the 19th of December 2018. The regional constitution stipulated that a presidential term would last 4 years with an election to follow. However, the issue was that the presidential term was 4 years, whereas parliament and in turn the government's term was 5 years, which was politically not the most practical system. This would result in Southwest State Parliament voting to provide an amendment to the constitution to alter the presidential term from 4 to 5 years, in turn extending the administration's term by 1 year, enabling the terms of the government and parliament to coincide. This has been disputed and rejected by Laftagaren's opposition, who are adamant for elections to be held immediately. Opposition candidates are arguing that an extension by a sitting parliament is not legally feasible. Indeed, while such an argument may be plausible at first sight, it is important to understand that under Articles 132 to 134 of the Somali Constitution, which the Southwest State Constitution derives from, enables the Legislative Chamber of Parliament to amend the Constitution, including a term, by a two-third majority. It was following the end of the initial presidential term in November of last year that opposition groups based in Mogadishu began ramping efforts to begin an insurrection against the government in Baydhabo. For months prior to this, President Laftagaren took a series of steps in an attempt to counter any such activities. For instance, ensuring all flights from Mogadishu must have a passenger list before flying, as well as banning certain individuals from traveling to the state. This ultimately would curtail certain efforts by opposition candidates from raising a militia, despite the fact that they managed to do so anyway. Now, it seems as though all actions taken so far are an identical replication of the fake news espionage that took place in Mogadishu to weaken or topple the then administration, which ultimately failed but did force the administration of Farmajo to hand over power to Prime Minister Roble in April of 2021. It is clear that opposition candidates in Southwest State are attempting to utilize the same methodology to topple the Laftagaren government. For instance, We've seen the creation of a fake news media outlet, initially created under the pretext of providing news to my speakers, only to be reformed to become a disinformation factory. We then saw the formation of a joint opposition group representing a particular group, which accused the government of illegitimacy using flawed and inaccurate legal arguments intertwined with clan politics. Number 3, we saw the formation of the Southwest State Force, or this militia group, which began arming clan militia to fight the government while accusing the government of oppressing dissent. And number 4, more regular press conferences calling on the international community to intervene, enabling foreign meddling. Now, many have questioned the role of federal government. Now, despite his recent silence, former Al-Shabaab deputy leader and current religion minister of Somalia, Mukhtar Robo, has been at the forefront of the opposition to Loftegren, having previously attempted to compete against the latter before being detained in 2018. His appointment to the cabinet would initially spark a rift between Mogadishu and Baydhabo. Now, Robo has already appeared at a number of opposition rallies in Mogadishu despite his federal minister role. Indeed, some have assessed to what extent his militia based in Bakol played a role in the formation of the SWSF militia, utilized by opposition politicians in Mogadishu to increase clashes in Baydhabo. Similarly, we have also seen a major role played by State Minister of Interior, Ilyas Hassan. Now, Hassan is a member of Himulaqaran, a party led by Sharif Sheikh Ahmed, a former president. Now, Hassan set up the current fake news factory machine at Al Media, which has been at the forefront of producing inaccurate disinformation to label and categorize the Southwest State government as a dictatorship while supporting a militia as well as opposition figures as saviors to save Southwest State from what I called tyranny. This is clearly a second federal government minister openly attacking the Southwest State administration and actively supporting opposition in Mogadishu to topple Loftegren. Therefore, one has to ask themselves how much of a role Villa Somalia plays in this political dispute. Of course, President Hassan Sheikh would not openly admit this support for the opposition despite being clearly in favor of this. For instance, Southwest State politicians are harbored in Mogadishu, and most are close allies of the president or are even members of his UPD party. Ministers and his government are actively and openly working with Southwest State opposition in Mogadishu to discredit the government in Baydhabo. And number 3, appointment of key opponents of Loftegren into the federal government roles. And finally, the perception by Villa Somalia. The president of Loftegren and the Southwest State is a key and staunch ally of former president Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo. Now, irrespective of all the above actions, the reality is that despite the president favoring the replacement of Loftegren, he cannot openly support such actions, as it will create more federal member state opposition for Villa Somalia. We know that Puntland and Southwest State have formed a political alliance which could formulate into one we've previously seen between Kismayo and Garowe, which is obviously currently been on the lower side. Indeed, relations between Mogadishu and Garowe are already non-existent, which means that if, for instance, Villa Somalia was opposed to what's going on in the Southwest State with President Loftegren, it could lead to tensions or more tensions between Garowe and Mogadishu. Additionally, all other federal member states, excluding Puntland, have extended their presidential terms, as I've stated before, and state leaders have already thrown support behind Loftegren's term. In other words, objection by Mahmoud could be perceived as a direct threat to their own term extensions, which could lead to more stiff opposition for Villa Somalia at the National Consultative Council meetings and federalization at the federal and state levels. So, back to the conference. Over the past month, Speaker of the House of the People, Adam Madobe, has been traveling throughout Southwest State to stir up support for a state reconciliation conference following recent clashes. The calls were accepted by both the state government led by Loftegren and opposition politicians in Mogadishu. However, the conference has been delayed, with the scheduled January 5th date being postponed. Indeed, with the arrival of President Hassan Sheikh in Baydhabo, it is expected to kick off very soon. So what are the issues on the table? The main issue on the table is the current election roadmap and the political dispute. Now, opposition candidates want the election to occur now and for the state government to reject the parliamentary vote that enacted an amendment to the constitution. Conversely, the state government is arguing that the term will be ending this year and all state presidential candidates should prepare for elections over the next month. How this political dispute will be resolved is difficult to see, as the positions of the disputing sides are at the polar opposites. However, the fact that the elections will be happening this year should be a positive the opposition candidates, as it ensures an opportunity to participate. If we compare Southwest State to other federal member states, Baydhabo is the most engaging with opposition candidates, and the willingness of Laftagan to participate in a reconciliation conference, as well as hold an open election in November, is a strong step forward. For instance, opposition candidates and parties in Puntland have been ignored, with many accusing the Denny government of rigging the ongoing voter registration process. If we look at Jubaland as well, Baydhabo has been controlling Kismayo with an iron fist for over a decade, and we can see the dispute currently going on between Gedo and the Gedo regional administration and its opposition to Jubaland leadership and Kismayo. Now, a peaceful resolution during the conference and an agreement for an election to be held in November, as stipulated by Southwest State laws, would be the most positive outcome for the region for two reasons. One, it would make Southwest State and Laftagan the first state to hold an open state election in the south, with opposition candidates freely allowed to contest, making Southwest State an example for other federal member states, particularly Hirshabelle, Galmudug, and Jubaland. Number two, an end of political instability, which enables focus to be shifted back to the war against Al-Shabaab, which controls large swathes of areas in Southwest States, Lower Shabelle, Bakol, and Bay regions. With the liberation of critical region in Middle Shabelle in recent days, including Harar Dere, Southwest State must capitalize on the momentum with a united effort. Divisions and fractures in Southwest State would only aid Al-Shabaab. For instance, militants could easily embed themselves within fighting factions and create havoc. And finally, a shift of resources towards an increasing IDP camps in Baydhabo, as the drought continues to affect nomadic populations in the southern territories. Nevertheless, tensions still remain, as opposition candidates recently accused Southwest State Police of harassing them at the airport following arrival as part of Speaker Madobe's delegation, although this has been denied by state police. In the most recent rift, Southwest State candidates are threatening to not attend the conference because many have demanded that they are allowed to bring armed men from Mogadishu as part of, I quote, a security detail to Baydhabo and the conference, a request rejected by Southwest State security forces for security reasons. Now, there have been talks to find a solution to this current impasse. The reality is that it is within everybody's interest that the current impasse is resolved via dialogue, whether it's Baydhabo, whether it's the opposition in Mogadishu, or whether it's Villa Somalia itself. The war against Al-Shabaab continues, and Southwest State has seen relative peace and prosperity in recent years. The derailing of both efforts could see catastrophe not just for Southwest State as a region, but also Somalia as a whole, because Southwest State is in the heart of the nation.